Joining us now to help break down this situation and what happens next is One America's very own Jennifer Franco. So Jennifer, this is one of those processes we've known what is going to happen for the longest time now. It's almost like a movie that we've seen the ending to. But today we got a couple little change-ups on us. What are people in the House and then also the Senate saying about this process after the articles of impeachment were filed?
So, as you can imagine, the responses that we're seeing from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, they're what we've seen throughout the process. And now that the articles have been passed, it's the same. It's very partisan. So, both Democrats and Republicans, of course, stressing that they want to make sure that the Constitution is preserved. Their outlook and their definition of how that is going to happen, of course, differs because of their political affiliations. But we heard from Republicans standing by the president, ultimately, again, insisting that the president did not commit an impeachable offense. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy spoke earlier, and he really came hard at his Democrat colleagues for passing these articles of impeachment in the House, saying that it's going to tarnish their reputation. Their legacy is stained, and this is what they're going to be remembered for. And ultimately, he also noted that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, like you mentioned, is threatening to withhold the articles of impeachment from the Senate. He says that that's Pelosi signaling that she's admitting defeat on this entire process and basically saying that they don't have the facts. He says it's time for the American people to move on. So, of course, we heard from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi herself, and her response was interesting, sort of a juxtaposition to what we saw her talk about yesterday and even her demeanor. She ultimately came out today and said that the people have a spring in their step after these articles were approved, which is striking considering the fact that yesterday she was seen wearing black. Everybody was talking about the fact she was wearing black. She shushed her caucus after they started cheering when that first article of impeachment was approved in the House. So interesting to note that differing tone that she was providing today.
Right.
And again, she did mention that she is planning to hold back those articles of impeachment from reaching the Senate until senators prove that they can provide a fair trial, which I'll get to that a little bit later on.
Sure.
But I do want to talk about McConnell, sort of kind of riding on the coattails of what Kevin McCarthy said. And again, there's a lot of talk about legacy and a lot of talk about precedent. He said, quote, that this was a slapdash process, said it's the first purely partisan presidential impeachment since the wake of the Civil War. He says that it was rushed, it was predetermined, and again, it sets a very dangerous precedent for presidents to come. And again, he also said that because Democrats are threatening to withhold those articles from the upper chamber, they're afraid. They're afraid that the president's going to get acquitted, which is ultimately what McConnell has said will happen in the upper chamber.
Yeah, and I want to jump in really quick because what Nancy Pelosi said actually kind of strikes me a little bit because this morning we're seeing some polls come out. For example, I'm reading a Reuters one right here on my computer that now says that less than half of Americans support impeaching and removing President Trump from office. And this was taken literally right after the vote yesterday. This comes after last week's, it was supposed to be the bombshell type of the inquiry, all the findings in the House, and that just isn't the case as of right now. I mean, this whole process isn't going the way that they wanted to. If it was, these articles would be making their way to the Senate. And the reason why Pelosi isn't saying that is because that Mitch McConnell has said that he's working with the White House. He's a Republican. Of course, President Trump is a Republican. He says this whole process has been partisan, so it shouldn't be any surprise that the defense now is being partisan. So I want to ask you, too, what has the White House said about this? Has there been any new developments regarding that? Have they said anything about this process?
Definitely. So the president, of course, was tweeting out earlier, but we actually got a little refresher of how he feels about this entire thing at a White House meeting that he had with a Democrat congressman who actually just defected to the Republican Party. He was meeting with Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey earlier. And again, he reiterated, he said this whole thing is a hoax. Basically feels that he doesn't feel like he and the Republicans were impeached yesterday, which is something he touched on during the rally in Michigan, which is a key swing state. And again, just to reiterate his tweets, he said, now the Do Nothing Party, they want to do nothing with the articles. He said that ultimately, if they do end up withholding those articles from the Senate, they're losing by default. So I do want to point out, though, that, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is now actually constitutionally bound to send those over to the Senate in a speedy manner. So really, she could kick the can down the road on this for as long as she can, which would ultimately delay the trial. And with that, the president's acquittal. But going to 2020, though, the White House, the president's campaign, feels very, very confident about their chances in 2020, even with impeachment. I mean, we heard from Brad Parscale, Trump's 2020 campaign manager, yesterday, And he announced that the campaign raised $5 million on impeachment day, just to show you those sort of numbers. And then to piggyback off of that, the RNC actually released their latest numbers from November. They raised more than $20 million in the month, another record fundraising month for the RNC. So this shows you what sort of enthusiasm the president's going into his re-election bid with.
Right. I mean, this is a hurdle that we weren't expecting, so it's kind of interesting, actually. I mean, in a way, I'm kind of excited about this. It's something that we weren't expecting this entire time, and it's something that might actually kind of change things up moving forward. But as we were saying, too, it doesn't seem like anything is going to change in the Senate. That's really where this all comes down to. So, I mean, while things are changing, I don't think we should expect too much of a bombshell moving forward. But Jennifer Franco, you can catch her 12, 3, and 6 o'clock Eastern Time. Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Alex.